Hello everybody, welcome to this video, a student exemplar, a comparison of Porphyria's lover and attitudes to romantic love with one of the poem, Sonnet 29 being the chosen poem. The student who wrote this wants to remain anonymous, but if your work is featured in a student exemplar video, I'll send you a free copy of my English language guide and a free copy of my English literature guide. So email your work to info@mrbruff.com. In both Porphyria's Lover and Sonnet 29, the poets both present romantic relationships filled with passion and desire, but with different obstacles in between the narrator and the ability to fully express or act on their feelings. In Sonnet 29, this obstacle is Barrett Browning's thoughts about her lover, which obscure her from seeing his true self, while in Porphyria's Lover it is the narrator's psychotic nature and extreme jealousy and pettiness. Okay, so this is quite a long introduction, but I love the idea it expresses. For me, I would actually have just not worried about this sentence here. But I love the idea introduced because it's a coherent line of argument, a two-part line of argument, which is what I really recommend for the highest marks. And it's basically saying, okay, there's romantic love in both, so about half of the answer I would hope would represent and look at that romantic love. And then it also says there are the obstacles, and I would hope the next half of the answer looks at the obstacles. So let's jump right in. Sonnet 29 makes the ardent love in between the poet and her lover much clearer, whereas in the other poem it is merely hinted at, probably because it's so obscured by the jealousy and psychotic nature of the lover. The main way the love is expressed in Sonnet 29 is because the poem is written in a sonnet form, a type of poetry traditionally used for love poetry. She uses the Petrarchan form, which dated from the 14th century and was not commonly used at the time of writing. Most poets use the Shakespearean sonnet, which was invented later. And this could show how the love she felt was ancient and timeless, and therefore this type of sonnet expressed it better. So I like that idea, okay, about the sonnet form and why not use the more contemporary sonnet form. That's good. By contrast, the narrator does not actually ever make any explicit links to his love for Porphyria before the point when he kills her. The phrase, "her cheek once more blushed bright beneath my burning kiss," which uses plosive b sounds to effectively portray the vehemence of his love, is said after the murder. By making this structural choice of only mentioning love after Porphyria's death, the poet clearly shows how the narrator's psychopathic nature prohibits him from loving in the normal way. Okay, I like that. I like the mixture of the plosive b sounds, but I also like the fact that it's made clear that it's a structure point. Let's carry on. In Porphyria's Lover, the narrator is presented as clearly inferior to and jealous of his lover. Porphyria is described to have glided in. The choice of this verb indicates she's an angelic, inhuman being rather than a mere mortal. The word order in this line, when in glided Porphyria straight, is an example of poetic inversion where the poet has placed the verb earlier on in the sentence in order to emphasize it, so highlighting Porphyria's movements more. The fact that she walks so effortlessly elevates her position and makes her seem more powerful than the narrator, which could indicate tension in the relationship. The fact that she made the cheerless grate blaze up reinforces the idea of her having supernatural powers. The personification here portrays her as someone with hypnotic powers, able to alter people's moods. The comma bracket around the word last in line 14 creates a caesura before and after the word, meaning the reader pauses here. This serves to emphasize the word's meaning, and this hints at his annoyance and anger at being last on her list of activities, showing his annoyance that he can't exercise enough control over her. She is described as the active person in the relationship as she is the subject in the phrase, "made my cheek lie there." In this way, the poet shows how she is in control of the man's body and decides what happens to it. Furthermore, the vivid imagery of the phrase and spread over all her yellow hair invokes ideas of her consuming him, again the active force. All these descriptions of Porphyria as a strong woman and how this impacts on the narrator's ability to love her directly contrast with the role of women in the Victorian era when the poem was written. Then, women had very few rights. They could not vote or own property. In fact, a married woman became the legal property of her husband. Therefore, presenting a character such as Porphyria, Browning may be directly challenging these ideals. Now, this is an interesting paragraph because it falls into the very common mistake with poetry of just writing up all of the ideas you have about the poem, and there are about 7 different ideas in this paragraph. I feel like the answer's becoming, let me just tell you everything I know about the poem, rather than sticking to the premise of the introduction, which is that both are passionately in love, but there are obstacles. This is just a paragraph of all sorts of things going on, and it really lacks that cohesion or that coherent line of argument that would be required to get that highest mark. So what you want to do is to have the idea behind a paragraph, which could be there are obstacles in the way of love, but I wouldn't ever write a paragraph with 7 ideas in it. Some of these ideas are fantastic, and many of them come from my videos as well. So you can check out, the poetic inversion, all of that kind of thing. That's all in my video analysis of Porphyria's Lover. But I think I would take an idea like the idea of poetic inversion, and I would just spend ages exploring what that might show. I think there's too many ideas in this paragraph, and whenever you've got that many ideas in a paragraph, what you end up with is none of them being fully explored. There is some evidence that Barrett Browning also sees herself as less powerful than Robert, who the poem is written to. At the start of the poem, some of Barrett Browning's language choices could suggest Robert is the stronger force in the relationship. For example, the extended metaphor of the vine around the tree initially portrays him as a strong, stable person that she must wrap around for support. For example, she describes her thoughts as a straggling green, the choice of this adjective highlighting that she's weak and worthless without him. Furthermore, the choice of the tree and vine as the main imagery of the poem could allude to what Jesus said in the Bible, that his disciples were like a vine that leaned on him for support, and without him they could not support themselves, let alone bear fruit. Therefore, Robert could be said to be presented almost as godlike, a godlike being, and Barrett Browning's spiritual leader and guide. Furthermore, the fact that Robert is referred to as her palm tree reinforces this idea. The date palm is the symbol of an oasis in the desert, which could suggest she thinks Robert gives her life and happiness. The idea of the palm growing successfully when all around it is barren, dry desert could symbolize how he's helped feelings of love to grow in her when she's had a life that was previously devoid of love. She was 38 when she wrote the poem, which is quite late in a person's life to fall in love, especially in Victorian times when people married young as life expectancy was low. So the use of the palm tree could show that even though her romantic awakening is late, it is filled with desire. Now, interestingly, and I hope you see the difference here, this paragraph is really all one big idea explored with a couple of different references. But I still am not convinced that it's actually answering the question, or sort of expressing the ideas that were suggested in the introduction. It's moved on to Barrett Browning as less powerful than Robert, and I didn't feel like that was where we were going. Because it was the idea of the thoughts obscuring her view of him. So it just really feels like this student clearly knows the poem very well, but has got a bit carried away in writing every clever idea they know of the poem, rather than really clearly explaining or exploring the question with a solid answer. In Porphyria's Lover, the romantic relationship is presented as extremely unhealthy and perverse, with the narrator driven to commit cold-blooded murder where he feels no remorse in order to allow him to regain dominance in the relationship. Pathetic fallacy is used at the opening of the poem to enable the reader to understand the poet's mood, and therefore foreshadow his actions later on. The wind destroys trees for spite and did its worst to annoy the lake. The word choice here shows how the wind is acting with extremely malicious nature just because it can. It has the ability to destroy things, so it does so. This reflects the ease with which the narrator makes the decision to kill Porphyria. This seriously shows the troubled relationship. The fact that the description of the murder uses such calm, matter-of-fact language, and I strangled her, reflects that the narrator strongly feels this was the right decision to make. He shows no deliberation or hesitation, which shows that he felt deep down that he had the right to do as he pleased in this relationship. Porphyria is objectified, the narrator refers to her as it, which enables the poet to further emphasize his point that the relationship is extremely unhealthy. So here's another paragraph which, if we look at what the student said in the introduction they were going to say, it was a romantic relationship filled with passion and desire, but the obstacle being the psychotic nature. Now, where this now says, rather than saying this is a relationship presented with passion and desire, it says it's extremely unhealthy and perverse. So it just feels like there's no kind of coherent line of argument, which is always such a, an issue. Let's finish with this paragraph. The whole poem is written on iambic tetrameter, and coupled with the strong ABAB rhyme scheme, it has a very strong sense of rhythm. This gives it a very controlled, measured nature, which contrasts with the nature of the narrator completely. He is unable to restrain his inner drive for murder. Perhaps Browning uses this to make the point that no relationship is safe from corruption. Although people may appear to be ordinary under the surface, strange things can happen. The tight meter could also represent his desire to exercise tight control over Porphyria, and the fact that it begins and ends in a line in very strict iambic tetrameter shows that ultimately he's successful in his goal. However, it is extremely interesting that every line with the word Porphyria in it do not conform to the iambic tetrameter. Each one's regularity is broken by the 9 syllables instead of 8, and this could be a subtle but extremely important hint of Porphyria's desire to evade his control. The fact that she can't fit into his chosen poetic form could show that she refuses to be ruled by him. Okay, so there's quite a bit, and that's a very clever idea about Porphyria refusing to be owned. But in the introduction says the issue is the psychotic nature and jealousy and pettiness of the narrator. Nothing about, the uh, inability to control and that sort of thing. So I'll tell you what I think about this answer. I think this is an incredibly intelligent student who knows the poems very, very well, but they lost sight of the line of argument they so brilliantly expressed at the beginning. And I would just say that this could be slightly tweaked to get the highest marks if it was just structured in a way that said, here is, of all the things I've just said, I would have the first paragraph that shows the passion and desire in Porphyria's lover. Then the next bit I would show the passion and desire in Sonnet 29. And then the next bit I would explore the obstacles in Sonnet 29 or Porphyria's lover, and the next bit the obstacles in the other poem. So basically having a two-part line of argument. Most of these ideas this student has expressed could be included in that analysis, but at the moment it reads like so much work that I look at where the student loves the work, knows the poem, but there isn't a coherent or cohesive line of argument that is needed for the highest marks.